The British efforts would be slowed down by American partisans mainly led by General Francis Marion, Andrew Pickens, and Thomas Sumter. Washington, back north, was able to convince Congress to send his man in order to lead the next Continental Army, and he chose General Nathaniel Greene, one of his right-hand men. He also sent General Daniel Morgan, one of the heroes of Saratoga, with him to help train and raise a militia army that was capable of holding their own against the British. Upon reaching the southern colonies, they would meet the British, but would not engage in open combat. This was because Greene knew he couldn't stand up to the British in open field combat, mainly because the American troops that he had never seen battle before and were mostly made up of untrained militia. Greene and Morgan began enacting guerrilla warfare and guerrilla campaigns against the British in order to attack their supply lines, disrupt communication, and decrease recruiting efforts. They were also able to sway many people that were loyalists to joining the American cause, much to the ire of the British, who at this point were almost giving up on the southern backwoods due to the fierce civil war and hornet's nest that they had stirred up. So Cornwallis started figuring out a plan to get all of his forces together in Charleston, South Carolina, and march and defeat Greene. The British idea that most people in the southern colonies were loyalists had been proven false, and as it turns out, after the failed 1776 attack, many people reevaluated their loyalty to the British, and many arguments and then warfare would break out in the backwoods. So you would have between 1776 and 1779 a lot of tension, a lot of bloody hand-to-hand combat, and a lot of ruthless murder that would occur in the backwoods that the British were unaware of. See, unlike the northern colonies, the British lacked many spies in the southern colonies, so when they reached Charleston and Savannah in late 1779, they did not have much information to go off of. Over the course of the campaign, they had tried to get their whereabouts as to where the situation was socially and politically, and Cornwallis had decided that by sending many of his well-trained officers to the backcountry, they could restore order, and that everything would be fine after a few months. These men could have been better used in the field for the campaign, potentially at Cowpens and at Guilford Courthouse, but instead they were stuck in the backwoods of South Carolina and Georgia, helping the petty squabbles of Loyalist and Patriot forces. Ultimately, this would see men such as Christian Huck be put in command. Christian Huck was one of the leaders of the British Legion, and many people would deem him a psychopath today. He would murder in cold blood, he would not give quarter to surrendering troops regardless of the circumstances, and ultimately he would be surrounded and killed by American sharpshooters during a bloody skirmish early in the morning. Meanwhile, things were not going well for the British Loyalists. The fighting in South Carolina's backwoods had turned in favor of the Patriots, who were able to unify under various commanders and coordinate attacks that would attack major Loyalist strongholds. It didn't help also that Patrick Ferguson's Loyalist force of over 1,000 men had been surrounded and defeated by the Over Mountain men and Virginia militia. This was a heavy blow because Cornwallis thought that Ferguson was the perfect commander to go through the Carolinas and recruit men to the British cause, and ideally he would go through western North Carolina and potentially go into Virginia. However, after his defeat, this would not happen. The British were not 100% sure why their sudden strategy was failing,